The message that crashed into Westminster today wasn't a rumour. It wasn't a leak. It was a political explosion. Just 1 minute ago, Nigel Farage made the most aggressive move of his career. A move aimed directly at the heart of power. A move to oust Prime Minister Keir Starmer from Parliament itself. The reaction across the UK was instant. Shouts in the Commons, emergency calls in Downing Street, and a wave of panic ripping through every corner of British politics. What pushed Farage to make this move? Why now? And how close is Starmer to losing everything? Everything begins here. The moment Nigel Farage stood up in Parliament, the atmosphere shifted. It was subtle at first. Papers stopped rustling, conversations froze mid-sentence, and even the speaker leaned forward as if he could feel something breaking through the air. Farage wasn't holding his usual confident grin. He wasn't laughing, smirking, or waiting for applause. Instead, he carried a stack of documents like a weapon, and his eyes were locked straight on Keir Starmer. Starmer sensed it immediately. He straightened his tie, adjusted his notes, and tried to read the room, but the room was already reading him. Advisors behind him leaned in, whispering rapidly, trying to predict the next move. But no one predicted this. Not today, not this suddenly, and not with the force Farage was about to unleash. Then Farage spoke, cold, sharp, and loud enough to slice through the chamber. He accused Starmer of failing Britain, misleading Parliament, and endangering the trust of the British people. Each line hit like a hammer. MPs stared in disbelief. Some cheered. Others murmured, but no one, not a single person, looked away. Starmer didn't move. He kept his jaw tight, but his eyes widened with every sentence. This wasn't a debate. It wasn't political theatre. This was an ambush. Planned, timed, and designed to shake Starmer's foundations. Farage then presented what he called the formal motion. A motion to challenge Starmer's legitimacy and push Parliament toward removing him from leadership. Gasps erupted. The Speaker demanded order, but the chamber had already erupted into chaos. Phones lit up instantly. Advisors sprinted out of the room. Journalists typed so fast their keyboards rattled. And within minutes, the news blasted across the country. Farage has moved to oust Starmer. The phrase spread like wildfire on screens, in offices, on buses, in homes. People couldn't believe it was real. Was Farage serious? Was it political strategy or personal vengeance? Inside Downing Street, alarms went off. Starmer's inner circle scrambled to respond. Some insisted it was a stunt. Others warned it was bigger, much bigger, because Farage wasn't acting alone. Rumours whispered through Westminster that a small but growing faction of MPs, tired, frustrated and furious, were quietly preparing to back Farage's move. If that was true, Starmer wasn't just facing a political attack. He was facing a rebellion. Starmer tried to stand, to speak, to push back, but his voice cracked under the noise. The chamber was drowning in shouts, some demanding answers, others demanding his removal. Farage watched silently, arms crossed, letting the chaos speak for him. For the first time since taking office, Starmer looked cornered, surrounded, vulnerable. And as the Speaker finally slammed the gavel ordering silence, one thing became terrifyingly clear. This wasn't just a challenge. This wasn't just a political gesture. This was the beginning of a full-scale attempt to bring Starmer down. And Farage had just fired the first shot. As the chamber slowly settled into a tense, vibrating silence, everyone could feel it. This was no longer a routine parliamentary session. This was a battlefield. And Nigel Farage had just drawn the first line in the sand. The Speaker's voice echoed through the hall, calling for order, but even he sounded shaken. Starmer finally rose, gripping the edges of his desk, as if the wood itself was the only thing keeping him standing. Cameras zoomed in, capturing the smallest twitch of his hand. The Prime Minister scanned the room, searching for allies, but the expressions staring back at him were unreadable. Some cold, some cautious, some quietly thrilled to see the balance of power begin to tilt. Then Farage stepped forward again. This time, he didn't shout. He didn't raise his voice. He spoke slowly, deliberately, letting each word sink deep into the cracks he had already created in Starmer's authority. He accused Starmer of hiding crucial information from Parliament. He accused him of ignoring warnings, and then he delivered the line that plunged Westminster into total shock. This Prime Minister no longer has the confidence of the House. The reaction was instant. Gasps, murmurs, a wave of disbelief that surged across the benches like electricity. Starmer's eyes narrowed, trying to hold his composure, but Farage wasn't done. He pulled out a list, names, signatures, support from MPs who had secretly aligned with him. And that list wasn't empty. It wasn't symbolic. It was real. Starmer's advisors exchanged panicked glances. This meant Farage had been planning this for weeks, quietly, strategically, gathering support behind closed doors while Starmer believed he was still fully in control. The Prime Minister knew the danger. A challenge like this wasn't just embarrassing, it was lethal. If more MPs joined Farage, even out of frustration or political pressure, Starmer's leadership could unravel in hours. Across the hall, Labour MPs whispered fiercely among themselves, unsure whether to defend their leader or distance themselves from the rising storm. The opposition benches erupted with excitement, sensing blood in the water. For the first time, the power dynamic shifted, not in speeches or votes, but in the raw atmosphere of the room. Starmer cleared his throat, preparing to respond, but the interruption came before he could say a word. An MP from his own party stood up. Not a backbencher, not a minor figure, a senior member, one of his trusted allies. The room froze again. The MP didn't defend Starmer. He didn't condemn Farage. He simply demanded clarity from the Prime Minister. That single word hit harder than any accusation. Farage watched him with a faint smirk, knowing what it meant. If Starmer's own allies were asking for clarity, it was the first crack in his armour, small but deadly. Cameras captured every second, broadcasting the unravelling leadership live across the UK. Outside Westminster, crowds began forming. Protesters, supporters, curious onlookers. Everyone wanted to know what would happen next. Rumours spread faster than official statements. Some claimed Starmer was preparing to resign. Others insisted he would fight back. And a few whispered that Farage had more evidence he hadn't revealed yet. Inside the Commons, Starmer finally spoke. His voice was steady, but there was a tremor beneath it. He accused Farage of political games, of stunts designed to divide the nation, but Farage simply smiled because he knew something Starmer didn't know. The momentum had shifted, not slightly, not gradually, completely. What started as a challenge had transformed into a legitimate threat. Starmer wasn't just defending policy anymore, he was defending his position, his authority, his future. And as Farage stepped back, letting the chaos swirl around him, one chilling truth became impossible to ignore. This fight was no longer between two political rivals. It was between a Prime Minister desperately trying to hold on and a challenger who had nothing left to lose. The chamber braced itself because everyone could sense it. This was only the beginning. The tension inside Westminster reached a level that felt almost unreal, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. After Starmer's strained defence, the chamber didn't calm. If anything, the uncertainty thickened. MPs shifted in their seats, glancing at each other, trying to measure which way the wind was blowing. Farage stood motionless, almost silent now, letting the weight of his move settle over the room like storm clouds. He had made his strike. Now he was waiting to see who would join him in tightening the noose. Starmer, meanwhile, was desperately signalling to his advisors, who hurried toward the side doors, whispering into phones, scrambling to intercept the growing wave of rebellion. But the cracks were spreading faster than they could be patched. Another MP stood, this time from the opposition, and he openly declared that Farage had raised questions that could no longer be ignored. The chamber erupted again. Starmer's frustration flashed across his face. This wasn't a debate anymore. It was a public unravelling. Every sentence spoken seemed to chip away at what little stability he had left. And then the speaker, his voice tired but firm, called for immediate consultation, something done only in moments of extreme political crisis. The announcement alone sent a ripple through the room. Consultation meant emergency discussion. Emergency discussion meant the leadership itself was under threat. Outside, crowds pressed against iron gates, phones raised, voices shouting, "Boshi." News channels switched into emergency coverage. Analysts debated whether this could be the fastest political collapse in modern British history. Inside Parliament, the doors closed, sealing the most powerful people in the country behind thick wood and centuries-old tradition. Farage leaned back, arms folded, watching Starmer with unshakable confidence. He looked like a man who already believed he had won. He wasn't rushing, he wasn't shouting. He was letting Parliament, the media and the public do the work for him. Because once the idea of removing a Prime Minister takes hold, it spreads like wildfire, quiet whispers becoming undeniable force. Starmer tried again to regain control. He warned of instability, of division, of the dangers of letting political chaos rule the day, but his voice lacked the power it once carried. Each word felt like it was fighting against a tide he could no longer stop. Desperation began slipping through the cracks of his calm expression. Meanwhile, MPs huddled in small groups around the edges of the chamber. Their discussions were fast, intense and full of conflicting emotions, fear of backlash, anger at Starmer's decisions, excitement at the possibility of change. Farage approached one cluster, speaking to them in a low, controlled voice. He wasn't begging for support. He was offering a deal, stability, accountability, a reset of leadership. And his confidence was contagious. One MP nodded, then another, and then another. The shift was happening right in front of Starmer's eyes. What he feared most was no longer a hypothetical. It was unfolding second by second. Then came the moment that truly changed everything. A Labour MP, one who had publicly defended Starmer countless times, stood and announced that he would support further review of the Prime Minister's leadership. The room froze. Starmer's face drained of colour. This wasn't a minor defection. This was betrayal at the highest level. Farage's eyes sharpened. The momentum he wanted was now unstoppable. The Speaker declared that the motion would move forward for formal consideration. A shockwave hit the chamber. This meant Farage's challenge had crossed the threshold. It was no longer a political stunt. It was official. It was real. And it had the power to end Starmer's leadership. Outside, the atmosphere turned electric. Chants grew louder. Reporters rushed to broadcast breaking updates. Politicians who had remained silent for months began posting cryptic messages online. The entire nation was reacting, watching a political earthquake unfold live. And inside, as the chamber doors opened for the next phase of the crisis, Starmer and Farage walked out side by side, but with completely different realities on their shoulders. One walked out fighting to survive, the other walked out ready to claim victory, and everyone knew the next hours would determine the future of the United Kingdom. As the chamber emptied into the echoing halls of Westminster, the entire building felt electrified, as though history itself was pacing through the corridors. Starmer moved quickly, surrounded by advisors who spoke in rushed whispers, trying to convince him that the situation was still recoverable. But deep inside, he knew the truth. This wasn't a storm he could simply outtalk or outwait. This was a political fire, and Nigel Farage had struck the match in front of the entire nation. Down the hall, Farage walked with a calmness that unnerved even his closest critics. He wasn't celebrating, he was calculating. Every step, every breath, every glance showed a man who believed momentum was fully on his side. Reporters swarmed him, firing questions from every angle, but he simply raised a hand and delivered a short, chilling line. The country deserves leadership. Today, Parliament begins correcting its course. That sentence exploded across every news outlet within seconds. In Downing Street, Starmer's team scrambled to craft a response, but their statements sounded defensive, shaky and disconnected from the mood sweeping through Parliament. Even members of Starmer's own party admitted privately that the tide was turning faster than they could handle. The press outside number 10 grew thicker by the minute, cameras stacked like barricades, waiting for a sign. Any sign of Starmer's next move. Meanwhile, inside private meeting rooms, MPs gathered behind closed doors, whispering about the future. Some argued that backing Starmer now would show unity. Others said it would be political suicide. And several, influenced by Farage's boldness, insisted the country needed a reset before things spiralled even further. Every conversation ended the same way: uncertainty, fear, and the quiet acknowledgement that the Prime Minister's position was hanging by a thread, thinner than anyone expected. Farage, using this tension to his advantage, met quietly with influential MPs. His tone was steady, almost diplomatic, But beneath it was a subtle pressure, an unspoken message that siding with him now meant standing on the winning side of history. The more he spoke, the more MPs leaned in. The shift wasn't loud, it wasn't chaotic, it was silent, steady and devastating. Inside number 10, Starmer finally held an emergency gathering. His voice was firm, but his expression betrayed the strain. He insisted he would fight the motion, that he would not allow Farage to destabilise the government. But even as he spoke, his inner circle exchanged looks that hinted at doubt, at fear, at the possibility that they might soon be preparing a resignation speech instead of a defence strategy. And while Starmer pushed for unity, Farage prepared his final message of the night. Standing before a cluster of microphones outside Westminster, he delivered a speech that rippled across the country. He spoke of responsibility, of accountability, of leadership. But beneath the carefully chosen words was something sharper, a clear warning that this was not just the beginning of a debate, but the beginning of an end. The crowd erupted, some cheering, others shouting. But one thing was undeniable. Farage had seized the national spotlight and he wasn't letting go. Back inside Downing Street, Starmer stared at the glowing screens, showing Farage's speech, his reflection faintly visible against the broadcast. For the first time since he took power, he looked like a man standing at the edge of political collapse. No matter what he said tomorrow, no matter what his team prepared, the narrative had already shifted. The motion to challenge his leadership was moving forward. The rebellion inside Parliament was strengthening, and the people of the UK, watching every second with breathless intensity, were already choosing sides. As the night settled over London, one truth became painfully clear. The battle between Starmer and Farage had entered its final phase. And when dawn arrived, the United Kingdom might wake up to a political landscape it had never seen before.